for us, the Louvre being the most well-known museum in the world and the most envied museum in the world, creating a new museum of the Louvre was kind of really a great challenge. And then with these new things like presenting the collections differently and finding a new way to look at the collections for an art historian, for a museum person, it's a great way to change your look at things. And then also there was this challenge of getting new visitors, new publics to the museum. And that's also one of the big challenges of the museum, but also what makes this job unique. I became an art historian because I was interested in beauty and in what's beautiful, and I wanted to understand better what made something beautiful and also why people would have a different vision of beauty through time. So that's maybe the heart of being an art historian. And then I had a fascination for some form of arts, especially medieval art, which is why I ended up a medievalist. Well, there were many reasons why Lens was chosen as the place for the Louvre. Those reasons are as different as the fact that there was no museum in Lens, the fact that there was an available land of 22 hectares in the center of the city where the museum could be built. There was the enthusiasm of the people of the city, and then there was the fact that it was also a way to go towards public, which usually doesn't go to the museum. The Lens area has a history which is only, in fact, industrial. The region was born, as we see it now, through the discovery and the extraction of coal. And so it was also this that made the Louvre Lens interesting. It's the confrontation between both and the way we can use culture to bring this territory to a new era. At the end of the competition to choose the architects, there were three main architects which remained: Rudy Ricciotti, Zaha Hadid, and SANAA. Only the project from SANAA took into account the part we are in and this idea of openness, of easy access that we wanted to give to the museum, and which they gave with this very simple, very flat building where you enter very easily.
The collaboration with SANAA was extremely fruitful. The Japanese architects are not very talkative, but with time, you get to understand and translate the slightest moves, the slightest intonation, and you end up by really establishing a real strong dialogue.
The concept of the Galerie du Temps is quite simple. Where in usual museums, the pieces are presented separated among civilizations or among techniques, like in the Louvre, you've got the paintings on one side and the sculptures on the other side. You've got Greek art here and Egyptian art at the other end of the museum. The idea here was to insist on what the artworks had in common. So instead of separating, we have this one big room where the pieces are presented in a chronological order, starting 3,500 before Christ with the invention of writing, and you go through time until 1850, which is the end of the collections of the Louvre, and all along you can compare and confront pieces from different civilizations, from different techniques.
The scenography or the museography concept and design here was grown and driven by, I would say, 3-4 elements of most importance. The artifacts are in dialogue regardless of the department from which they come from. And that is a huge step for the Musée du Louvre. It's a huge step. So accessibility and architecture, of course, the incredible volume designed by Sejima and Nishizawa, 125 meter long by 25 meter wide gallery, which is like 3,200 meters square in one volume. And from there are some logics that came naturally. The idea of not closing at all, never, not rebuilding any volume or architectural volume within the architecture, allowing artifacts to dialogue at 360 degrees between themselves. And from there, I would say that the first key element was to say, okay, we will not hang any artifact on the walls, and we will be in the center of the space itself. so that people can evolve, walk around all throughout. And from this decision came another one that only Sejima-san could take, because at that time the walls were still in plaster. And then Sejima said, okay, you don't want to hang on my walls? I'm going to do in so that no one ever hangs anything on my walls. And then she introduced the aluminium, which was already outside of the building, but she introduced it inside, which kind of erased entirely the walls. And it was a genius idea. Not only was it totally cohesive and in the logic of what I had been thinking, but also it was somehow conveying ghosts of the artifacts that have not made it here and that are still in Paris, in the Louvre. So the whole idea was incredible. That's probably one key element. Another one was to say that we would work with these kinds of slightly imbricated, almost geographical islands or archipelagos of podiums or cimaises or plinth, and that would allow the visitors to understand not only the chronology, but also more or less the geographical and the areas in which he is evolving. The chronology was a big, strong element, and that's why we designed this rule of time, which kind of gives you the pace of time throughout the gallery. Sometimes your steps are 500 years, sometimes they're 10 years, depends. So we designed this with a graphic designer from Switzerland, Norm. And the last element, which is probably the most important also, is the work with the curators and with the director of the Louvre on which artifact, where, to say what. And we started with over 500 artifacts, and for about 3 years, selected, picked up, displayed, changed, replaced, in order to arrive today with 210, which are making sense at 360 degrees. It's designed, but it's not the design that generate the content. It's the content, what is at stake, that generates the design, and that is supported and conveyed by the design also.
Since the opening, we've had over 100,000 people. That means 1% out of 3 from the Lens area who has come to the museum in the first 6 months. So it means that there is a great envy to visit the museum. There is this will to discover the museum for many people who had never been to a museum. And many of them not only come, but come and come again. And people here feel like they belong to the museum and the museum belongs to them.
The feedback we get from the visitors, the variety of visitors, there seems to be a huge satisfaction and a great enthusiasm, especially on the Galerie du Temps, which is the backbone of the museum, which is a gallery which for the first time invites you to walk out through about 4,000 years of history of art in a totally free way. And it's not a frightening freedom. On the contrary, it's a freedom that gives you the sense that you have the tools, you have the capacities to understand and to make your way. And I think that the whole project, as a global project, seems to be a success because it has taken in account, since the beginning, that very idea of accessibility, in the sense of feeling welcomed, hosted, and having the feeling that you have the capacities to access and that it is accessible to you. And that idea of accessibility is really a keystone in the project.
I really dream that the success we're having right now in the Louvre Lens, where we have lots of visitors coming from the land, coming from abroad, will not be only something that we'll know at the opening of the museum, but that will continue through time while I'm here, but also once I'm gone, that the Louvre Lens will really impose itself as one of the major museums in the world.